with Just Wingin It BBQ. Welcome back. And on today's episode, we are tackling the holy grail of barbecue, the Packer brisket and burnt ends, with my stupid, simple brisket recipe. I'm going to walk you through how I picked out this particular brisket, how I'm going to trim it, how I'm going to season it, exactly how we're going to treat it, how we're going to let it rest, literally from start to finish, with the most basic, simple recipe for a brisket. There's a million ways that you can make a brisket. Everybody out there has their own method, what they like to do, what they don't like to do. Everybody thinks they're right, but in reality, you need to start out with a good base recipe that you can expand on and try different things. And this is that base recipe. Because in the long run, when you do try to add things to it, you don't want to add too many things because you won't know what doesn't work. So you find something that does work and then you build on it. Tweak things here and there, like something, don't like something, add, delete. So stick around. We're going to take it nice and slow. I'm going to do a lot of talking for this one, and I'm really going to explain exactly what I'm doing because everybody's intimidated by the mighty brisket. Nobody wants to mess it up. It's a very expensive cut of meat. You want to look good for everybody when you're cooking a brisket, and the reality of it is you're going to mess up a bunch of briskets to get to know how to do it correctly. And what we want to do is get to a point where we're making briskets consistently. The same every time, they're coming out good. So again, this is a very basic, bare bones recipe. You're going to be able to follow it, no problems, I promise you. So stick around and let's just get to winging it.
Alright everyone, this is the trimming portion of the video. Starting out with our 15-pound Choice full packer brisket. Choice is a very good cut of meat. It's still going to have great marbling. You're going to get great results out of it. And it's not too expensive to where you'll be upset if you mess it up. So this particular brisket, I made sure the flat was on the thicker side and it's even all the way up to the point. We still have the fat cap on the back like I just pointed out. And really we're just going to take it slow and start trimming this thing up. You can always take off more. It's really hard to put fat back on. So we're just gonna speed the video up here and show you exactly how I trim this thing up, starting with the hard fat up here on the point. Alright, so we're just slowly starting to take off pieces of this hard fat here on the point. This stuff will never render down and it's just going to get in the way of our smoke and our rub. So we're just taking slices here and setting them off to the side. And you're just gonna slowly start chipping away at the hard fat, anything that looks like it's hanging off that's gonna burn, any of the silver skin or sinew that's still left on your brisket. We're not trimming this thing up for competition, so we're not looking for pretty at all. We just want to get rid of anything that's not going to cook down or be appetizing, any of that gray oxidized meat that's on the side there. That's inevitable. You just trim that off. And I tend to trim a little bit more than most in my experience with cooking briskets. The intramuscular marbling on a Choice or higher is going to be plenty to keep this thing moist during the cooking process. And the way I cook my briskets, I really don't feel the need to keep a whole lot of fat. And I'm not a brisket professional, so this is where you can use your trial and error and see what works for you and your particular cooker or your particular cut of meat. Just try it. And I do a lot by feel, so if it doesn't feel right, I cut it off. Now we just come around to the point and keep trimming away little by little. Some of the thinner stuff there would just burn up anyway in the cooker. Now you see you have any oxidized stuff, like I said, on the side. You can just trim it off. You could try to square it up a little bit if you would like, just to make it look kind of pretty. Now if we flip it over to the fat cap side, we're just going to go ahead and do the same thing. You can leave between 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch of fat cap. Some people don't trim it at all. Again, this is one of those scenarios where you can see what works for you. I trim most of it off underneath the point, and then I like to leave a small layer on the thinner portion of the flat to help keep it moist, because we're going to be cooking this thing fat side down, because the heat source on my smoker is from the bottom, so that fat acts as a layer of protection from the heat while this thing cooks. And I apologize, I don't know what happened to this video, but the end portion did not record, but you see most of how I trim the flat here. It's pretty much the same as the top. Just go slow until you get it to the point where you like it. If you start to go too deep and you see that you're taking off too much, you just back off and start cutting again somewhere else, and just try your best. In my opinion, it takes a lot of practice, not really an exact science. You just kind of see what works for you. Each cut of meat is going to be slightly different, but the only way to get better at it is to cook them in practice. And at the end of the day, it's still a great cut of meat that's slow cooked, and with a little bit of barbecue sauce, anything's going to be good. But we want to get to the point where these things are coming out good and consistent. So all I did was continue to trim the flat up to my liking, and when I come back you will see the finished product, and then we're going to show you the rub that we're going to put on the outside of this brisket. Alright, now that we are all trimmed up, I'm going to go ahead and show you what kind of rub we're going to put on this brisket. This is a very simple, the most basic rub you can do. It's called a Dalmatian rub or a Texas style rub. And this is where in the future, once you get your basics down, you can get fancy. The only thing that I am going to share with you that I do additionally to the rub with my briskets or any beef, I use a little bit of Worcestershire sauce as a binder. It complements the beef extremely well, no matter what kind of rub you end up using. A very thin coat of this will go a long way. There are 100 other different binders you can do. You can use no binder. Again, this all ends up being personal preference and the flavor profiles that you like to go for, but I find this to work extremely well, so I use it consistently with my briskets. As you can see, we left that little bit of fat on the thinner portion of the flat just to help keep it protected during this cook. Go ahead and put a little bit of that Worcestershire sauce on the back here as well. Now, our rub is a 1-to-1 mixture. here in a mason jar of coarse ground kosher salt and coarse ground black pepper, or also known as butcher ground. It's a larger black pepper, and this stuff is going to complement this brisket extremely well. It's going to give it a really nice bark. Because the salt and the pepper are larger, it's going to hold up during the cook, and it's going to create a really deep bark on this brisket. And we're just giving it a fairly thick coat, and we're just going to press that in. And in between using the rub, make sure you give it a little shake or a swirl every once in a while. That way you make sure you're getting a good mixture of salt and pepper. And this is where, once you're comfortable, I've put coffee in my rubs for beef. You can use any pre-manufactured rubs. You can add whatever you like to make it your own. I'm only showing you the most basic way to do it, so that you can get great results that you can expand on in the future. Make sure you get your sides as well. And you can be pretty liberal. It's a large cut of meat. It can take the seasoning. And because the salt grains are much larger than an ordinary table salt, you can definitely put more of it without risking it being overly salty. We're just going to flip it over and do the same thing on this side. This stage is also where you can experiment with injections when you get more comfortable and want to add more variables. It's something I tend to do with my larger cuts of meat like this brisket. And once we get all of our sides evenly coated, we're going to let this brisket come up to room temperature here on the counter, which is very important because there are varying thicknesses on this cut of meat. So you want it to be room temperature so that it cooks evenly and your flat isn't warmer than your point, which is obviously thicker. So it's very important to have it come up to temperature while we are preparing our smoker. Alright, it's about 1 o'clock in the morning. We have our brisket going on our silverback pellet smoker. Have it preheated to 250 degrees. And we are just going to place this thing right on the grates, get it set up, because the way we put it on the grates and maneuver it is the way it's going to cook and how it's going to look as the final product. And we're also going to go ahead and put our Weber iGrill Mini Bluetooth probe into the thickest part. That way I can go ahead and monitor that. And I have a second probe that's going to go into the flat, and that's hooked up to the control board of my silverback. I'll be able to check on the flat internal temperature. We're just going to get the lid closed and let this smoke do its job, and we're going to check on it in about 4 or 5 hours. We're really not going to do anything to it, and at that point we're going to start spritzing with just plain water as needed. Again, this is another variable you can add in the future. You can use apple juice, apple cider vinegar, any sort of mixture you can think of to spritz this brisket to keep it moist. You can also use a water pan, which I don't because it's humid enough here. Alright, we're at about the 7-hour mark. I'm just going to give you a quick update. We've been spritzing with that water as needed. Our bark has really set, looks great. And we're just going to go ahead and hit this with another spritz to keep it from drying out. And we're right around that 150 degree mark. So if you were going to wrap in either butcher paper or foil, this is when you would do that. I don't wrap my briskets. I cook straight through the stall. If you're in a time crunch or you are your bark is getting too dark and you don't want it to get any darker, by all means you can wrap. I do not. I like the results better from not wrapping, but this is another variable again where you can do whatever works for you. Alright, it took another 4 hours. We are at the 11-hour mark and we hit our 205 degree internal temperature. You want anywhere between 203 and 210. You know, kind of let your cut be the determining factor. I go until it's probe tender and my instant thermometer slides right in like a hot knife in some butter. So now is a very, very crucial part. We're going to wrap our brisket tightly in butcher paper. If you do not have butcher paper, you can use foil. I prefer butcher paper because it really protects the bark that we worked hard on. It will absorb some of that fat, but it won't necessarily steam it as much as foil. And now we're going to just place it right in this pan, get it into a dry cooler with a couple towels, and we want to let it rest for at least an hour. You can hold it up to 4 if you really need to hold it for a certain time. Alright, after about 2 hours of resting, we're going to go ahead and slice this thing up. First slice we're going to make is to separate the flat from the point here. You'll see this natural seam where that large vein of fat was when we first started cooking. Just going to run your knife through there and the flat will separate right off at the point. Here's your point. I'm going to go ahead and set that off to the side. Now we have our flat. And what we're going to do is locate our grain and just start making cuts on an angle, or bias if you want to use a fancy term. And you can see that beautiful smoke ring we have. And if you have trouble locating your grain, a tip for when you're applying your rub before you cook your brisket, you can go ahead and make a score mark against the grain so that after it's cooked and that bark is set, you can find which way the grain is running. I'm going to go ahead and keep slicing this. You can make your cuts as thin or as thick as you like, depending on what you're going to use it for. And I'm just slicing them and setting it off in a pan on the side. Very, very happy with the moisture content and that smoke ring. It looks beautiful. And that bark is super, super crispy. That's exactly what I was going for. You can't get that type of bark when you wrap a brisket. And I found that when you wrap a brisket, you really run the risk of making it taste almost like a pot roast. So I'm a big fan of not wrapping. You just find the method that works for you and stick to it. Now we're getting into the part of the flat that was closer to the point, and this is where your money slices are going to come from. You have a lot more intramuscular fat up here that renders down, that collagen breaks down. Other ends of the point run the risk of getting a little dry. If your cut doesn't have a lot of intramuscular fat, it's a large cut of meat, so you may get some pieces that are drier than others. Not a huge deal. Now this is a fairly thick slice. You can still see it's got a nice bend to it. It holds itself under its own weight, but just a slight tug and this thing pulls straight apart. These extra little scraps I'm just setting to the side in our burn ends tray. Get another one of these money slices, a little bit thinner. You just look at that. Tender, supports itself, but it's just moist and pulls right apart. Perfectly cooked brisket. I'll finish cutting that flat up later. Now we're going to move on to the point. And what we're going to do is cube this up and make some awesome burnt ends out of this. Nice and juicy. That fat really rendered down, and we really preserve that awesome looking bark. We're just going to make kind of 1-inch cubes here. Set those off into this foil pan. Alright, our point is all cubed up here in our foil pan. Now I just have some Gorilla Grill's Congo Kick barbecue sauce that I thinned out with a little bit of water. You can use whatever barbecue sauce you like. I like this one, it's got a little bit of heat to it. And we're just going to go ahead and drizzle that all over our point cubes. And we're going to come behind that with some dark brown sugar. Decent amount, you just eyeball it. And then just go ahead and get that all tossed up. Evenly coated in your barbecue sauce and brown sugar. Now we're going to tightly wrap this in some foil and get it back on our grill between 275 and 300 to finish these off.
Alright everybody, we're ready to show you the end result to all of our hard work. Our flat is all sliced up here like we showed before, and our burnt ends just came off of the grill. They're all caramelized up, they smell insane. So this actually isn't for me and my family. This was requested by my neighbor who always gets to smell us cooking in the backyard. So we went ahead and hooked them up with this. But I am going to sneak a little taste because there's no way I can cook up some awesome brisket and burnt ends without at least trying it a little bit. So as far as the burnt ends, let's get a decent one. That's a good one. And I'm going to walk around and just kind of come up to the camera just so you can see the consistency here. I don't know if you guys can see it. Let me take a look. Yeah. These things are like awesome little nuggets of brisket.
Yep. Those ones are long, right?
This is by far my favorite part of a brisket. Super sweet from that brown sugar and the barbecue sauce. Bark is very nice and crispy. This is amazing. You wanna try?
Oh, thanks.
Nope, not today. Maybe later for dinner. Okay, burnt end is done.
Maybe when we get to the cardio.
Okay. And we're gonna grab a little piece of the flat.
Yep. It is really long because look how long that one is. So long.
So long. Just pulls apart. Super moist, tender. You can try that one, right? Good. Nice and beefy. I appreciate you guys sticking around. I wanted to make this as simple as I could so that anybody could try it. I mean, the almost 6-year-old loves it, so it's got to be good.
Guess what? 2 more months until my birthday.
2 more months till her birthday. So this has been, excuse me, stupid, simple brisket and burnt ends. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. If it was a little lengthy, I'm sorry. I just wanted to get everything in there.
My birthday's on September 18th.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell after you subscribe if you want to get notified when I post new videos. Check out my Instagram. It's where I post all the glamour shots of everything. And drop me a comment. And I really appreciate you stopping by. And always remember to just keep winging it.
And make sure to keep making these recipes.
Give me some. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.